Welcome to Flix Revolution, the official show of the Austin Revolution Film Festival. Now, your host, James Christopher.
And welcome back to Flix Revolution. I'm your host, James Christopher. This is episode 3, but this is the episode that I think is going to cut to the quick of what this show is all about. First, a shout out. I'm wearing my Scary Movies and Chill shirt. I love these. These are just fantastic, and that's what this month is all about. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about horror movies. In specific, we're talking slasher movies. Today's going to be a fun episode because Daniel Baldwin is here to try to explain to me why I don't get Friday the 13th as a fan. Look, I understand the movie. I understand what it's about. I don't always understand the fandom of it because, in my mind, for as rabid as the fan base is, it's a relatively simple concept. And maybe it's my circus and my monkeys, so we're going to get to that. But I did want to talk about some other slasher movies that maybe you've seen and maybe you haven't. And I'm going to start with one. And if you haven't seen it, I'm giving you permission to hit pause on this episode and go watch it. But you can't talk about slasher movies and you can't dive into what this episode and next episode's about without talking about the movie Psycho. It is the granddaddy of them all. Some people consider it a slasher, some people don't. Some people just consider it a thriller. But I think you can't deny that so many of the tropes that we love about horror movies and about slasher movies in particular really at least got their mainstream popularity in this movie. For example, the nature of the score and the sort of screeching, kind of off-kilter sound that comes with it definitely is shown up back in both the Friday the 13th series and Halloween and many others. The movie also made some really tangible connections to so many of the slasher films that we know and love. The name Loomis appears not just in Halloween in the form of Dr. Samuel Loomis, but also in Scream as Billy Loomis, kind of an homage, a nod to Psycho by having that name appear in those two subsequent movies and franchises. Now, the most tangible connection that we have between Psycho and other slasher movies is Janet Leigh, famously the lead in Psycho, famously the one who takes one too many showers, is in fact the mother of Jamie Lee Curtis. And so they get a great moment in Halloween H2O, one of my favorite moments of all the Halloween series, where we kind of intersect those two movies. So we're going to talk a lot more about Halloween next week, but definitely, if you haven't seen Psycho, why? Now we're going to dive into some that maybe are a little less common or a little less known to normals. And we're going to start with the movie Peeping Tom. Now, Peeping Tom kind of predates a lot of the known slasher genres like Halloween, like Friday the 13th. But it had a unique twist because it involved a filmmaker serial killer who would bring women up to his studio and he would stab them with a knife attached to the end of the tripod. The idea being that he's capturing their last moments of life on film. It's very meta. It's a lot of fun, and it's actually a scene that gets parodied in Halloween Resurrection. That's right, the one with Busta Rhymes. But it also got parodied in little-known indie horror classic directed by me, Quad X2, The Porn Movie Massacre.
What should we talk about first? My favorite color? What? At least my death was meta.
Now, the next two horror movie goodness may be, unfortunately, the kind of movies that made my mother say, horror movies? Those are not worthwhile. These are two of those sort of definitive direct-to-VHS, beautiful cover that just made you get it because the cover kind of terrified you. Now, the first one is Jack Frost. And no, I am not referring to the wonderful, touching film with Michael Keaton. This movie actually ruined that movie for me. Jack Frost is a movie about a serial killer who becomes a snowman and uses his new snow powers to kill people. There's even a scene where he like melts himself, goes through the pipes, and then refreezes himself in a girl's bathtub to dispense of her. What is it with these movies and bathtubs?
Tommy, no! Don't put cold water in. No, it's freezing!
Now, next up, this one might seem a little sacrilegious, particularly those of you who know me know that I'm a military veteran, but I love Uncle Sam. The story of an American soldier killed in Iraq who becomes zombified, comes back to the U.S. and wreaks havoc dressed as, you guessed it, Uncle Sam. Again, it's silly, it's over the top, it's bloody. There's a scene where he like takes a flag and like plants it through a guy and then stands up and then he salutes it. I mean, that's epic no matter what you do. But again, Uncle Sam, you can find that online. I haven't revisited since I saw it in the late 90s. Maybe I should. Maybe I shouldn't.
No one will ever burn another flag. He's a red-blooded, all-American nightmare. Uncle Sam wants you dead.
And the last one you might have missed, but I think is, again, well worth your time, is the movie Behind the Mask, the Legend of Leslie Vernon. If you like The Office, but you like serial killers, this is the movie for you. I love the meta-narrative. It's why I love Scream, Hello. I love the concept that movies who acknowledge that they're movies and that other movies exist. It's a big part of what I teach. When I teach film, I definitely use those tropes a lot. And I love this movie because it's a world in which not only does Freddy exist, but it's about the serial killer who does all the prep work to do all the things we see in horror movies realistically. For example, when he stalks somebody, he stalks when they're looking, sprints when they're not. And then that's how they always keep up. He will go into a murder scene early and weaken all the possible weapons he can find. That way they don't hurt him. It's a very interesting meta-narrative that also still functions very much as a horror film.
There are 11 exits from the first floor and another 8 or 9 that might be manageable from the second floor. You want to eliminate as many as you can from being practical. So I've discreetly nailed them all shut.
Don't they just smash them out?
You'd think so, but you'd be surprised. No. And when they do smash it out, it's on the second floor or higher, and then they're out on the roof and they're screwed.
So those are a handful that you should check out this Halloween season if you haven't seen them yet. Again, if you haven't seen Psycho, shame on you. I cannot wait till we discuss Casablanca in a couple of weeks because I feel like I'm going to be equally frustrated. But now we're going to welcome back to the show Daniel Baldwin, and he is going to help me understand why people love Friday the 13th. All right, we are back here on Flix Revolution. Daniel Baldwin is back for his second of third appearances, the last one coming after Halloween ends. But we'll get to that next time. But, Daniel, I'm having you on because I'm a diehard Michael Myers Halloween fan. Mm-hmm. I'm surrounded by about 15 action figures that you just can't see that are just off camera. I generally speaking like all the movies. There's maybe 2 or 3 that are bad that I just don't get into. But I never got Friday the 13th. And I don't know if it's partly because to me it just felt like the first of several knockoffs to Halloween, or is it because the characters you actually want to die and I never could adjust to that. But what am I missing? Because I get it that in many ways it's the most popular horror franchise ever.
That's a tough one. I think a lot of it has to do with inventive kills and just rooting for Jason to or Mrs. Voorhees to absolutely slaughter a bunch of rude teenagers hanging out in the woods. Although it is funny that the franchise centers around or kicks off with a movie where Mrs. Voorhees is bumping off teenage counselors because they didn't watch her son when he was little, and then you don't really have any kids in the movies as campers until the sixth one.
Yeah.
But she doesn't even wait for them to screw up. Maybe these are good counselors. We'll never know. They're all dead now. But, I think there's an inherent fear of the woods that fuels a lot of it. Particularly for people who haven't grown up around it. I grew up in and around the woods all my life. I was an Eagle Scout when I was younger.
Yeah.
Nothing about it is foreign to me, but I know a lot of people do have a fear of, one, getting lost in the woods, and two, getting lost in the woods and being attacked by someone or something. So I think that there's a deep-seated fear that it really taps into there beyond just the murder and mayhem. But, it's hard to deny the fact that it kicked off as a knockoff of Halloween. And they also, especially in the first two films, ripped off a bunch of kills from an Italian movie called Bay of Blood.
Oh.
So there will never be any denying the exploitation rip-off nature of the series' origins, even though I think it's moved beyond that at this point.
So, yeah, and I almost wonder too if I get defensive because I'm the guy who still fights over Pearl Jam versus Nirvana. I'm a Pearl Jam guy, by the way, but I do think people don't have the same sort of respect for Michael Myers that they do of Freddy Krueger and of Jason. I get it why. I mean, I get the nature of when they came out and what the taste was for at the time, but as a character, is there a character that's Jason Voorhees, or is he Bruce the Shark in Jaws?
He's Bruce the Shark in Jaws. It's just pure rage. I guess if you want to go in classic monster terms, he's not a ghost, but the closest thing would be a wraith, just a spirit of vengeance that does nothing but lash out at anything around them. And that's what he is. There's not really a character beyond that. Sometimes you'll have, some of the other characters attempt to trick Jason by dressing up as his mother, or in the case of part 4, where Corey Feldman shaves his head and makes himself look like little Jason to kind of throw him off balance, or Freddy trying to trick him in Freddy versus Jason with something similar. But at the end of the day, there's really no reasoning with Jason Voorhees. He literally exists to do nothing but murder. That's an aspect of Michael Myers as well, but there's also a playful side to Michael that you see with the weird murder-fueled art tableaus that he tends to make.
Yeah. You go back to the pinning the guy to the wall, and then the first head tilt that we saw, which became, very German Shepherd-like, which is kind of what I dig about it. And I guess the other thing too with Michael, depending on which of the now 18 timelines that there are to follow, whether it's about him and Jamie's relationship, him and Laurie's relationship, and then later Jamie. Is it the simplicity then that makes people able to jump into a Jason movie? Because admittedly, again, there's 18 timelines for Halloween. If you jump into Halloween 4 or 5 or 6, you're confused if you've never seen any of the ones before it. I mean, is that part of what allows it to transcend generations like it does?
It could be. That might be part of why, they've always been cable mainstays. For the most part, you can watch any Friday the 13th movie and understand what's going on, because with few exceptions, there aren't any characters that carry over from one to the next. You're literally just watching a new cast every time, walking into the same horrible scenario, whether it's set at Crystal Lake or Manhattan or space. Yes. Yeah, I think they're way more formulaic than the Halloween movies. So I think, for better or worse, that's a plus in their column. with the general populace. The kills tend to be more inventive. For as much as I love Michael, he sticks to this, for the most part, sticks to the same types of weaponry.
Yeah. Yeah, his creativity comes in the posing of the victims as opposed to, like you said, the actual kill themselves.
And then this, I don't know if this one will, if you'll disagree with me or not here. So just wait till I'm finished.
Okay,
I think
go for it.
Halloween has had higher highs than the Friday the 13th franchise. I will never argue that. The best Halloween movies are better than anything the Friday the 13th franchise has to offer. But I would say that the Friday the 13th franchise is probably more consistent in terms of quality. It doesn't reach those peaks, but it doesn't dip down into valleys as hard. It's more steady, which means it's more predictable, which means people are more likely to know exactly what they're getting when they sit down with one. Audiences don't like surprises. You know?
Yeah, they know. I mean, that's a great point. As much as they say they do. I mean, we love romantic comedies because we know at some point the hot people on the poster are going to get together, and that's part of it's. In a world that's uncertain, we like that. Like you said, that certainty. I actually would completely agree with your assessment. I think part of what has been, as somebody who's written horror movies, and I know you write stuff too, you know how difficult it can be to stretch a common thread over 7-8 movies without having the plan. I mean, it's almost like watching the new Star Wars trilogy. Imagine how much better that would be if they all knew where they were going to end when they started. I definitely think that. I mean, you had, and then you have to start getting into the whole, well, let's explain why he's Michael. I definitely agree with you from that perspective. I think the only thing that I would maybe push back on is I don't know that Halloween has ever dipped to the level of almost self-parody that I think some of the Friday the 13th movies have done. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, do you think that hurts the overall franchise?
I do agree with that assessment. Hurts which franchise?
Friday the 13th.
It depends on the film. I think Friday the 13th Part 6 is a brilliant satire and one of the best films in the series because it doesn't forget to be a Friday the 13th movie while it's doing it. Sort of the Abbott and Costello example to, pitch back to Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. There are other instances where it drops into outright parody, and I'm not sure if it's intentional or not, particularly in some of the later sequels. I think that definitely does hurt it. And the Nightmare on Elm Street series is also guilty of this in some of its later films. It sands some of the edges off of Jason as a character. And when he's your Tommy Jarvis and a couple films aside, when Jason is the only character you have that is the through line, you really don't want to run the risk of making him a joke too much because there's no one else to lean on from film to film. So I think that can be a problem. Yeah.
I will, and I'll be honest, and I will completely undercut what I just said, because even the one time I think that Halloween does dip down to parody, it's parts of Halloween 5 where we have like the stupid music with the cops, like for some reason, I don't get why they chose any of that. So yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. But again, I would go back to your original premise and say, yeah, I do think they're remarkably consistent. And it's funny, the other dirty word in film is fan service, right? Like, oh my God, you can't do fan service. But at the end of the day, we're the fans. We want to tune in and see to some degree a new twist in what we already expect. And I think you're saying you get that from Friday the 13th.
Yeah. They are 100% there to give people the Jason movie that they expect when they sit down with them. And the few that don't, Jason Goes to Hell immediately comes to mind, where they try something completely radically different.
Sure.
That's one that most people don't like. There's some interesting things in that movie. I don't think it's an outright wash, but it's not hard to see why it was rejected at the time. That wasn't the Friday the 13th movie anybody wanted when they sat down. And at the end of the day, if you're not selling someone what's on the poster, for better or worse, you're going to get a lot of pushback for it, and it's going to damage what you're trying to do in terms of series longevity.
Do you think the producers and writers of Iron Man 3 must have missed that movie? And as a result, sorry, that's Daniel, that's a conversation for a little bit later, but I kind of wanted to get into that because I think that character's coming back. So we should dive into that as we get closer to his the Mandarin's reappearance in the series. So look, there are definitely some moments of all these movies that I dig, and I do want to get to the remake in a second. But like, I think one of the best kills in any movie is when Jason ties the girl in the sleeping bag and just is like banging her against the tree. Are there any moments that really stand out for you with that?
The sleeping bag kill is hard to top. That'll always be one of my favorites. And I like the riff on it that they do in Jason X, where he's in pretty much a Star Trek holodeck. Mm-hmm. And he's beating one person to death with a sleeping bag that has another person in it, but they're just giggling and not dying because they're not real. So that one's kind of funny. In terms of other favorite kills, oh boy. This one's not politically correct at all, but it's hard to not appreciate the absolute ridiculousness of the kill in part 2, where the poor guy in the wheelchair gets macheted in the head, and then it goes down 2 flights of stairs afterward, even though if you pay attention to the movie earlier, neither of those flights of stairs is near one another. So I don't know how that was accomplished, but you're not really thinking about that while you're watching it.
No, and you're probably going to give yourself a little willing suspension of disbelief when it gets to that. The remake, shot here in Austin, Texas. I knew actually a lot of people that did work on the movie. Got a lot of grief. I am one who is more forgiving of remakes than others, and I kind of thought it worked for me at some level, just like I think the Chainsaw movies did. Overall, what were your thoughts of the remake, and is that a direction they should keep going with the series?
I like the remake. I don't love it as much as some do, but I also don't hate it. I think Derek Mears was a perfect Jason. I have, zero notes on that front. I think he's absolutely wonderful in the film from start to finish. My biggest problem with it is that it, in addition to the fact that it's kind of just a Cliff Notes remake of 2 through 4, it's just a little too polished. I don't know. I can't really tell you why. It's more of a visceral thing for me, but I prefer the rough around to the edges, down and dirty look of the first 5 films, even though Friday 6 is one of my favorites. There's just something about the grittier, rawer filmmaking nature of those movies that really pops for me and smooths over a lot of their flaws. The remake lacks that. It's just a little too sanded down, even though it is very violent. So that knocks it for me. It puts it down a few pegs. I don't like it as much as I'd say about half of the original run, but I also prefer it to, 8, 9, and even Jason X, as fun as it is.
Yeah, and one of the things I think also hurt it, casting, the guy from Supernatural, Jared Padalecki, it's almost like you automatically gloss something up when you're using a known Hollywood star as opposed to a relatively unknown cast. On the other hand, we do have the guy that keeps calling the girl's tits stupendous, which I think is amazing. So it's definitely it's a mixed bag.
It is a mixed bag as far as the stupendous tits guy goes. One interesting thing about that is that actor who was also in Michael Bay's first Transformers movie, playing a douchebag high school jock named Travis. That is what his name is in the remake. Is it technically a sequel to Transformers? And that's what happened to him after that movie? Maybe. I don't know, but it's a possibility.
Fan theories born here on the show. Talk to me a little bit and maybe inform people. The rights to this movie have been in question and up and down. It's almost not as bad, but it's very similar to like the 007 stuff that we will continue to talk about on the show, and we talked about on previous iterations of the show. where is all that now? And are they able to make another film? And what do you want to see out of future versions of the franchise?
Okay. On the first one, basically what happened was Victor Miller was the screenwriter for the original film. And I don't know the specific details of how this works, but apparently after a certain amount of time, after you've written a movie, you can file for a rights termination on it and get those rights back.
Oh.
Now, another example would be Jim and John Thomas, the guys who wrote the first two Predator movies. They filed a rights termination on Predator recently, won, but immediately turned around and just negotiated a new deal with Fox and Disney. And the train just kept rolling. They just get more money now.
Sure.
Victor Miller wanted actual outright control of what he wrote, and he got it. But the problem there, and there were a bunch of appeals which drug out, over multiple years, finally ending last year, I believe. But the problem is that technically right now, Victor Miller owns the title Friday the 13th. He owns Crystal Lake. He owns Mrs. Voorhees, and he owns Little Jason.
I met that guy, by the way. He's a douchebag, but whatever. Yeah. I got drunk with him. It's whatever.
But
wow.
Sean Cunningham owns everything else. So he owns Adult Jason and the hockey mask look. But, basically, both of them could make movies on their own. It would be complicated, but they could do it. The problem is, if they want to be successful, they need to come back together and pair up on something. But they just spent years suing the crap out of each other and appealing it over and over in court. So do you hold on to your grudge, or do you want to just put it aside and make some money while you're both still alive, because they're not getting any younger? There have been rumblings probably over the past 2 or 3 months that a deal might be in the works finally, and that we could possibly see a new movie made sometime within the next year or two. Hopefully that's true. It'll remain to be seen exactly what happens, but I do think at this point, now that the lawsuits and the appeals are over, we're probably going to see a movie within the next 5 years. What do I want that to be? I don't want another remake, but I don't think they necessarily have to try and bend over backwards to try and make it fit in with the current remake or the original series. I think the best thing you could do is just have a bunch of counselors or a family or whatever show up for vacation at Crystal Lake, hint at a previous back history of murders that occurred in the past but haven't for a long time, and then just roll out from there. No remake, no reboot. It's just a loose sequel to whatever you want it to be.
It does seem like the Jason character lends itself to that, where already every movie was standalone anyway. Why try to figure out, again, like the Halloween problem of which anchor do you tie yourself to? Because no matter which one, it's going to be imperfect. Like, we're doing the Halloween episode next week, so we'll dive into that pretty heavily. But it does seem like you could just do that. The other thing I was going to ask, though, isn't the guy who owns the Adult Jason hockey mask thing, he has to be at the advantage, though, because he could just roll out Jason movies. Everybody knows who he is. You don't even have to mention Friday the 13th anymore. Or do you?
I don't think you have to. And there's already a built-in alternate town title in part 6, where, part of the backstory is that the town was trying to move on from the murders and had renamed themselves Forest Green. Mm-hmm. You could do that. You don't have to refer to Jason's mom, so that's not really an issue. But yeah, he probably could go ahead and make a Jason movie and just call it Jason. I think the problem would come with merchandising after that. How do you sell everything and still tie it in to what you already have without getting sued again? And I think at the end of the day, it's just easier for them both to come together and make what they want to make. But there are ways that he could get around it if he really wanted to.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. I'm looking forward to it. Now that we've finished this, I will I'm going to dive back in, and we'll have you back on in January or so and talk a little bit about how I found the movies. He is Daniel Baldwin. You can find him on The Chocolatier. We'll put his link down in the description of the podcast. Hey man, thanks so much for jumping on, helping us out, helping me get. I'm lost in the woods outside Crystal Lake, man. Thanks for helping me find the way. All right.
Well, hey, like I said, I'm an Eagle Scout. I'll help you out.
All right, so we're super excited to welcome to Flix Revolution one of our newest and yet most favorite ARFers, Katie Martin. She's the director of Dead Man's Hand and Sybil. Dead Man's Hand will play next year. Sybil played this current year. See what we did there, Katie? We did a little early announcement. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. It's good to see you again. By the time we were recording this, we have just been back from San Angelo, so I'm still feeling the hangover and the sadness and all that other stuff.
Yeah. It was a good time.
So let's talk a little bit about you. How did you go from someone who grew up liking movies, I presume, to someone now you're making them, you teach acting, you really have it all covered. So tell me a little bit about your journey.
Okay. So my parents knew very early on that I was going to be in acting. So I started musical theater at like 3 years old. And I did it for forever, and then got into on-camera acting and did it, for like, got to that point where it had been a while. And I was like, I'm tired of waiting for roles. Like, I've got to figure out how to make a movie, like I've got to create my own content and write some roles for myself. So that's the journey that I'm on. And I'm finding that I actually love the other side of it just as much.
When did you first know that you were like, oh, this behind the scenes thing is actually pretty cool? Like, was it the first time it happened, or was it upon like later reflection? How did you know that was the deal?
Well, I went to University of St. Thomas here in Houston, and I had this awesome instructor. But I was a broadcast journalism major, and he worked for the news station, and he gave us like filmmaking assignments. And so I was having a lot of fun with that, and actually learned that I loved editing at the time. So I dabbled then, which luckily it helped me out later. But I knew then that there was an interest. I just didn't pursue it as much,
So you pick up a camera. Sybil is your first film, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Talk to me about two things. I'm going to ask you a double-sided question. Not double-sided because it's all the same thing. But one, what gave you the courage to like write it and get involved in making it? And you took on the very difficult task of directing yourself, particularly first time out. How was that? And just tell me a little bit about the process of getting Sybil made.
Okay. It was during quarantine. So, and I knew right leading up to quarantine, I'd booked a few independent roles, but one of those kind of things where they never actually come to fruition, and they're like, you get used to it, but it's kind of disappointing as an actor. So I was really like, I have to make a movie,
Yeah.
And so it was during quarantine. So a summer, my partner and I, we went to just this random little town and booked some Airbnb that looked really cool in pictures. And we were like, let's check in and then let's just write something when we get there and see what happens. And so we did that. And it was challenging because I could be the only actor. She didn't want anything to do with being in front of the camera. So I was like, okay, all right, one actor in this space, what are we going to do? And so that's how Sybil was created. And it's a lot of like, you shoot, you run behind the camera, you watch it, you're like, no, I can do that better. And
It's funny. I only asked because I got roped into doing it in one of our last feature films because a lead quit like 10 days out and it was all about chemistry, and they at least felt like they knew me. So that was definitely a challenge. You talked about kind of making it with your partner. How, with Jessica, my wife, being so involved in our filmmaking, do you ever have like filmmaking fights that bleed into relationship fights, or relationship fights that bleed into filmmaking fights?
We haven't yet. So not yet. Like we usually are like on the same page. And
Okay.
I feel like, I'm the bossier one. So luckily she's like, yeah, sure, I will do that. And I'm like, okay, great. So yeah.
Until she watches this, and now she's like, wait a minute.
Wait, shh, can you edit that part out?
We'll cut that part out, or maybe not. All right, so let's talk then again, your new film, Dead Man's Hand, and it was interesting on a lot of levels. First of all, you talked to me before the festival about how your big goal was to improve some of your production value, which I found refreshing, because the number of filmmakers who come out of this thinking, oh, look at me, I'm Spielberg, it's most of them. So talk to me about what you want to do to kind of change from Sybil to this, and how you approached it and what else you might have learned.
Okay. Sybil, like from the time that we finished it, and it was the first film, and then the time it started screening in festivals, I had taken a few classes and stuff. And so it was like really cringy to watch it, like, I mean, I'm proud that it got done, but I was like, okay, now I need to have another go at this. And I really didn't like my lighting. So I was like, I have to focus on lighting and then like kind of use of color. So that was really my main purpose for doing Dead Man's Hand. And so it was a silent film because I didn't even want to mess with audio. I just wanted to like purely focus on that. And then, everybody's like, silent film, black and white. And I'm like, no, I want it to be like as colorful as I can make it. And so, yeah, I did that to practice that.
So where do you see, after now you've seen this, I guess, how many times has it screened so far? Has it just been the one so far?
Yes, just San Angelo.
Okay, so far. So anything from that first screening did you take away from that you think, okay, here's the thing we do next time? And do you see yourself back in front of the camera more?
Oh, I thought about that actually. I felt like I accomplished what I set to accomplish. Like there was definitely improvement there. So now I'm like, I want to write and work on a meatier piece and not be possessed, because I've been possessed twice now. So that's like my next goal is probably like more writing focused,
Yeah.
And then there is part of me that doesn't want to be behind the camera, that just wants to direct only, but I don't know if I'll do it yet. I don't know, because I love acting so much, and
Well, in this business, at least you can count on one actor to show up if you're the actor.
Oh, right.
Well, we can't wait to see what's next from you. Like I said, we're going to be playing at the Austin Revolution Film Festival, which I think makes you our first announced official selection.
Wow.
Mazel. But this is Halloween. This is our second of a series of 3 episodes that deal with the horror genre. Last week, we talked about Universal monster movies. This week, I'm trying to learn to like Friday the 13th. I think what happens is I hate the fact that it's more popular than Halloween, because Halloween I think is important, and therefore I don't get it. So therefore I'm almost angry about it. So are you a fan of the Friday the 13th movies?
I'm with you on Halloween.
Well,
yeah. So yeah, I don't know if I can convince you there. It's
my wife's go-to is Nightmare on Elm Street. That's also your kind of deal, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the one, like in high school, I watched the whole series. I was obsessed. I mean, Johnny Depp, and then like the corny little lines in it that are so cheesy. Yeah.
What works for you then, Freddy Krueger, and you mentioned the corny lines, because there's definitely some movies where it's more serious, some movies where it is more corny. But what about that character kind of appeals to you?
I do think it is that he is scary, and he's got his whole little creepy song, so you are terrified, right? But then there's also I like the mix of humor in it, where he's going to throw in like some really dumb line before he offs the guy, So, yeah, I think that was always my appeal, was like his one little liner, he's going to get in there right before he like slashes somebody.
I definitely think my favorite one was "Welcome to Prime Time, bitch."
I know mine was like one where I think it's Johnny Depp maybe, but the character's in like a waterbed and he's like, "How's this for a wet dream?"
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, now I'm getting terrified, because I couldn't handle those. Like when I was like, the first time I saw one was, I think, part 4. I told my mom I wouldn't go. I went anyway, and Benadryl later, I was able to finally get to sleep. A lot of what we're seeing in horror now is either remakes of what we grew up with or sequels to what we grew up with. I mean, I've got my Halloween Ends tickets. That's what next episode is going to be about. But are you watching any of the new stuff? What are some things that you've seen lately that kind of grab you?
I did like that. Did like the Halloweens that are coming out. My dad, so he grew me up on horror. Like it was like 6 years old, Friday family movie night. We're watching like Amityville Horror, which is one of my favorites. And I know it's not that recent, but that Ryan Reynolds remake, I did
good.
Like that. Yeah. So that was a good remake.
It's definitely proof that Ryan Reynolds actually can act. He's not just the
Pretty
smarmy, wise ass. All right, Katie. So where can people find your stuff? Do you know when you're playing next? How can people keep tracking your career?
I'm on Instagram as Katie Martin KTX. That's pretty much where you can find me. And yeah, what's next? I guess it's Austin Revolution Film Festival.
That's right. We're almost there. We are almost there. She is Katie Martin, director of Dead Man's Hand and Sybil. Thanks so much for jumping on Flix Revolution.
Yeah, thank you.
So that does, in fact, wrap up this episode of Flix Revolution. Had an absolute blast talking one of my favorite subgenres of horror, the slasher film. We broke down the Friday the 13th series, and I watched it. Ever since we recorded Daniel's interview, I did what he said, and I'll be honest, he was right. I enjoyed it way more than I ever have at any point in my time. I tried to not look at it as like what Halloween is a sort of serious treatise on the nature of fear in middle-class America. I tried to look at it as a B monster movie, sort of like Piranha. And when you watch it that way, it's a lot of fun. There are some episodes that are better than others. I love all of Corey Feldman's arc in the movie. So again, I'm a convert. I am turned around. I am in, as they say, bring on more movies. So we talked Friday the 13th. We talked Psycho. We talked some of the fun ones I grew up with. We saw some of the ones that I saw a little later in life, Killer Frost, Uncle Sam, and Behind the Mask, The Legend of Leslie Vernon. There are literally hundreds of slasher films out there. You can see the ones that have esteem, that have a really good reputation, like the Halloween series, like, again, Psycho, like Peeping Tom. And some of them are fun, the kind of crazy VHSs you might have seen when you were a kid or when I was a kid, and I would pick up just because the cover art was cool. But I hope as we dive into this Halloween season, you might carve a little time out to watch some of these movies and take a stab at some of the films you might not have seen. We've got more Halloween coming next week. Till then, y'all keep shooting, but not stabbing.
Flix Revolution is produced by Twitchy Dolphin Media and joins Let's Get 2, Go Go Astros, and Yell Fight Suey as part of the Twitchy Dolphin Media Network.